When Damon Lindelof walked into the writer's room and said, "Locke's in a wheelchair," and the other writers at the time said, "What?" When they were breaking the story, he said, "No, he's in a wheelchair, and when he gets to the island, he can walk." That's something that was not written before that moment. So I think thematically, we knew it was a mysterious island. We knew a lot of weird stuff was going to happen there. And they knew certain things about it, but they didn't know that. And so I think thematically, the show started to find itself. Directorially, one of the things I wanted to do for the pilot, that was based on the style of the pilot, which was actually elegant, stylish, simple, but not as weird as it could have been. You know, in the hands of another director, that material could have been low wide angles and dark, weird shots and, you know, branches and gnarly and much more David Cronenberg than J.J. Abrams directed it. He invited us to a beautiful yet threatening cinematic place. So I wanted to maintain that for the show. At the same time, since we were dealing with flashbacks, I knew that I didn't want to gimmick the flashbacks visually. I wanted it to seem that the characters were really where they were. And I wanted the world that they left to seem and be as real, if not more real, than the world they're in. So one of the things I found in doing Walkabout was that we would keep all green and blue out of the flashbacks, because the primary colors on the island obviously are green and blue. And because we were dealing with Locke's world in Oxnard, California, a very beige, brown, boring box company he works at, I decided that all the angles would be kind of wide. It's not weird like Tim Burton wide, but simple, wide, and no camera moves. So the world is dark. Plus I had to hide the wheel and reveal at the end that he was in a wheelchair, and I didn't want to build super tall desks and do all that stuff. So I had to find visual ways to hide the punchline of the show and also keep the flashback world different than the world they were on in the island. So we used much more long lenses, a lot more camera moves. The other thing I did was I never wanted it to be the handheld show. There's a lot of style of American television that's all handheld and jump cutty, like The Shield, and some wonderful television shows. The Sopranos, for example, was much more classical in its approach, much more like The Godfather, much more composed, and camera moves were used minimally. But there are a lot of television shows in America that feel if the camera's not jumping around and whip panning and everything, people are going to be bored. So I never wanted our show to look like that, but I wanted to employ handheld when the characters were losing their grip or something was going on, so that the camera would amplify visually what the characters were going through. So like in that scene, we did a lot of whip pan and handheld when the fabric of the community is starting to rip apart and everybody's frightened and it gets to be this tussle fighting thing. And then once that knife slams into what was written as a tree in the script, but I used the airplane chair because it was there, it was great. Once that knife cuts through the scene, bam, at that point I went back to classic studio mode and Locke takes control of the world. So the camera now becomes very low and wide and pushing in heroically on Locke, and everything sort of settles back down. So there were that and the fact that the flashbacks weren't going to be gimmicky. One other note about the flashbacks in the show. I didn't want them to be desaturated of color. I didn't want it to look like Cold Case, which is also another really good show, but they go back in the past, so they made the choice to make all those past scenes where the characters were younger, committing the crimes and what was going on. They decided to make them very, I guess, kind of monochromatic, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted the flashbacks to look like the real world still. So one thing I decided was, you know, you think of all these bad ideas as directors where, you know, okay, I'm going to go from a sweaty oceanic bottle in the sand that's going to be sandy and have blood on it, and then I'm going to see Jack Shepherd's bloody, scraped up hand pick it up, and as he lifts it up to his face to drink, I'm going to cut to a backlit martini in a Manhattan bar that's got, you know, blue light and red light, and suddenly Jack's in New York. And I thought, okay, so I had all those bad ideas about how to do gimmicky, kind of cute transitions, and I said, no, we're not going to do that. Let's just, you know, every transition can be different and it can go off a character, but let's not make it gimmicky.
Somewhere